welcome to episode 271 of Cinematary. I'm your host, Zach Dennis, and I'm here with
Miranda Barnwell
and Michael O'Malley.
And on today's episode, we will be talking about movies that we saw this week in part one. And in part two, we will be starting our new series to, conclude the year of 2019 and head into 2020 with our best of the decade look. We're going to be looking at the year 2010, talking about some of our picks for what we would classify as the best movie of that year, kind of looking back, as well as look at what the Academy Awards said that year and kind of, I guess, get more into a more philosophical discussion about the trends and some of the things that came from 2010 that have kind of carried over and are still prevalent in contemporary cinema today, especially with The Social Network. I'm sure we will talk more broadly from pop culture into just, things that much more larger, wider things about the subject of that movie, which was one of the big ones of that year. But let's go ahead and jump into movies that we saw this week. And the first one, which is starting to kind of widely be released around the nation, I caught it at Toronto. It is the latest from director Robert Eggers, and it is the Lighthouse. And there's not much you can say about this other than that, in terms of like a synopsis, other than it stars Robert Pattinson and Willem Dafoe, and they go to work at a lighthouse, and it's the 1890s, and it's just them in a white lighthouse for a long few weeks. Michael, you just caught it this past week, and it seemed like you really dug it, so I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I liked it quite a bit. There's like a few things going on in it that I really liked. For one, it looks gorgeous. It's like the, I guess, is it Academy ratio, or is it something close to Academy ratio, like as far as how it was shot?
Yeah, I believe so.
And this like really lush black and white that really captures like, these really interesting visuals. There's a lot of stuff with light, and there's like some effects that are brought in too, but, a lot of it is just these like interiors that are shot in this like, old lighthouse. It looks really cool, and the sets are really like meticulously designed with like all this old machinery and stuff like that. It's just like really fun to look at. And then of course like there's the the weird like psychological horror elements. There's some good tentacle action and some scary birds and stuff like that. But I think what struck me the most is like this movie is like, it's hilarious. Like, it's so funny.
Super funny.
And, like, I had heard... So, like, I guess it's kind of gotten the... it's made the rounds that this movie has, like, fart jokes in it. And those are great. Like, the first thing we see of Willem Dafoe's character, for the most part, like, you see him show up in, like, an establishing shot. And then, like, all you see is, like, there's this column in the middle of this room. And, Willem Dafoe's behind the column. And he's like, I guess he's like peeing into a bucket or something like that. And then you just see his butt, like all you see is like his butt like peek out from behind the column, and he farts. And it's just like stuff like that the whole movie. But I think even beyond that, like I was not prepared for like just how like on like a screenplay like dialogue basis, this movie was just like hilarious. And it's like a hilariousness that it's not like comic relief. It's like all part of the same. Like, it's all moving in the same direction, like the horror and the comedy and everything, like, all mixed together. Like, there'll be these long scenes that just make these really bizarre tonal shifts based on, like, the dialogue and stuff, where it'll all of a sudden be scary, and then it'll, like just jump into something, like, just really hilarious, like, all in the span of, like, just a few minutes. And I just thought it was great. Like, there's this one scene in particular where the scene starts with... Willem Dafoe's character and then Robert Pattinson's character kind of arguing about the food, and where Robert Pattinson's character is complaining that Willem Dafoe's character doesn't cook well, and so there's this kind of like comic interchange about like, Willem Dafoe's like talking like Mr. Krabs the whole time, so that's kind of like his character, and so he's like, "You don't fancy me lobster," and like it's really funny, and then all of a sudden it like verges into this really like scary moment where he like rears up and like gives this like really long elaborate like sailor's curse that like is cosmic, and the music gets scary, and then like it just ends on like a comedic note again, but like none of it feels like jarring. It all feels like you're like tracking with it in the moment, there's like no discontinuities. It just like flows from like all these different tones, and I don't know. I thought it was great.
You gotta like really get into it though. You gotta get like, "Arr, Willem Dafoe talks like this the entire time, and it's wonderful."
He does. And oh yeah, and there's like funny stuff like at the beginning of the movie, like Robert Pattinson's character says like, "Yes, sir," and Willem Dafoe's character's like, "No, say aye, sir." And so like, the whole movie's saying aye, sir.
I just imagine that Robert Eggers' script. I mean, he's very particular about like getting the vernacular correct and kind of making it very period centric. But I feel like Willem Dafoe just kind of was going with it and was like, "This sounds amazing. I've been wanting to just talk like this continuously all my life, and so I'm just gonna talk like this for the entire hour and a half movie."
I loved it so much. I don't know, I had heard some about the movie, but I was not expecting the Willem Dafoe's performance to be what it was.
I definitely agree with you though, because it throws you off in terms of like the shift between, because I mean Eggers' other movie is The Witch, which is much more clearly like a horror movie, and also
not a very funny movie.
It's not a very funny. It has kind of like more funny moments in the fact that it's just like absurd, like what's happening. I mean, like it's like honestly, I kind of laughed when the woman has the crow on her breast, and I'm just like, what's going on, you know? But this one, it's so like it's kind of difficult to really like figure out where your footing is on it. It seems like it feels like you're almost on a ship where it's just constantly like rearing you back and forth, and you can't ever get like solid footing, because at one point you're laughing, at one point you're kind of scared because just strange things are happening. At some points, maybe you're horny because Robert Pattinson's character gets really aroused and horny because he's lonely and bored the entire time and wants, and is stuck with Willem Dafoe constantly. It's just like this. At times it's like surreal, like there's like these kind of surrealist elements to it. It's such a strange, weird, absurd movie, and by the end of it was difficult. Even my review that I wrote for Cinematary, it sucks because I'm just like, I don't know like how I'm supposed to like categorize this thing. It's such a weird, absurd, undescribable movie at times, but at the same time I really, really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I don't remember who it was. I saw it with the whole big group. I don't remember who it was who said this, but someone mentioned like how you can't ever get your footing, and like that's also true of like the film's reality. Like there's like really disorienting things that the movie does with like what we're supposed to consider real or not, because it's all in this kind of like fevered state where like I guess we're with Robert Pattinson's point of view, and eventually it becomes clear that he's like a sort of unreliable point of view, but it never tells you at what point, like it never gives you a baseline reality to base it on. So Robert Pattinson and the movie will show you something that happens, and then Willem Dafoe's character will act as if something completely different happened. And it's just, there's never anything in the movie really that you can like just set your expectations on for like, okay, this is the world in which we're inhabiting for this movie. Like it's really slippery and unstable, not just on the tone, but on like literally what we're supposed to like perceive as happening.
No, I totally agree, because it does. Robert Pattinson's character, your kind of allegiance, I guess, for lack of a better word, to him is constantly kind of withering away, because initially you're kind of with him because Willem Dafoe's just shouting at him and making him do all this work, but then making
him make the deck shine like a sperm whale's pecker.
Exactly, as you do. I mean, it needs to look like that, But then, it's funny because like his descent into madness is vastly different than just the general descent into madness that Willem Dafoe is living in, and then by the end, like Willem Dafoe's madness seems a little bit more sustainable and tempered. It's like he has his madness is much more manageable. It's like, yeah, I'm crazy, but I'm like a manageable crazy. You're going a little bit too much, Robert Pattinson. And I don't know, by the end of it, I just love that it was like this weird movie about men being stuck together and being lonely. I thought I saw a wonderful, I think, Letterboxd review that was pretty much like, this is like the art house version of the It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia episode where Mac and Dennis buy a house in the suburbs together. And if you've never seen that episode, but you like the Lighthouse, please go see that, because it's pretty much the same thing, where it's just two men stuck in a space kind of together, and just the deterioration of just the facades and the kind of cordial nature that, not really cordial, but just the nature that we have with somebody if we're spending a substantial amount of time with them. It's like you just hit this breaking point where all of that kind of erodes away, and this one is much more like you've described. There's tentacles and all of these other kind of sci-fi fantasy elements to it, but I feel like at the core it's just like, yeah, being stuck in this place with another guy is just terrible, and this is what we're stuck with.
Yeah. I really dug it. It's a wild ride, and I think I'm better for having
I'll be curious how much longer A24 is going to try to like market Robert Eggers movies, because they seem pretty unmarketable. Even if you have Robert Pattinson, I just don't know how you're gonna like sell people on this movie. I don't know, it's so strange. Well, if you want to see The Lighthouse, you can catch it in theaters now. I just like talking like that. I would do that the rest of the podcast, but we would have so many people turn it off right now, so I will not. The movie I wanted to talk about real quickly, I guess technically it's a 2018 release, but it really went wide in the United States in 2019. It's the latest from Jaya Zenke. Jaya Zenke. I'm saying it incorrectly. I apologize. Andrew and people are listening to this right now and angry at me, and I apologize. I'm not going to say his name again. It's his latest, Ashes Purest White. I was a big fan, and I think a lot of the other people on Cinematary were big fans of his previous film, Mountains May Depart. But this one kind of shares a little bit of a kinship to that, in terms of not only having Zhao Tao as the lead character, but also it has the kind of triptych narrative structure where you follow her character in three different points of her life. So this one, you meet her as the girlfriend of this mobster who kind of seems like he's on the up in this town in China. It's a little bit underdeveloped, but the government is starting to invest in the surrounding area and kind of build it up a little bit more. And so he and the rest of his associates, as well as other kind of mobsters in the area, are using the opportunity to kind of work from the ground up and become ingrained in the community, and kind of put their mark on the town as it kind of rises out of obscurity. And so she is along with him on that ride. I guess, spoiler alert or whatever. I mean, it happens like 30 minutes into the movie, and the movie's 2 hours and 15 minutes. But she fires a gun in order to protect him during a fight that breaks out when this group of, it seems like kind of young people who are trying to just start stuff with the local mobsters, stop his car and pull him and his driver out and start beating him up. She fires the gun in the air to stop the fight and to kind of scatter everybody, but that is illegal. And so she is arrested and spends 5 years in prison for her act. We pick up with her after that sentence has kind of come through. She is meeting up with her what she eventually finds out is now her ex-boyfriend, as he has kind of moved on with his life, has kind of left seems to be trying to figure out how to kind of become more ingrained in this continuing to grow Chinese economic landscape. So she is kind of left without him to kind of losing her identity in that sense and having to kind of figure out life for herself. And then the final act has her once again reconnecting with him. He has had a stroke, I believe, and has lost the ability to walk, and so is in a wheelchair. And so she takes him in, and she is kind of returned to this to the town that they used to live in. It's developed, but not as developed as probably they thought it was at that previous time. And she is kind of reconnected with all of the other little mobster people that they were friends with, and is running this mahjong shop where she has it's mahjong and tea, and all of these former mobsters who are all hanging out, reminiscing about the good old times. But where Mountains Made Apart was much more, you're kind of invested in the emotionality and in the kind of the emotional roller coaster that movie goes through in terms of her relationship and the kind of love triangle that you have. Ashes Purest White again kind of takes that narrative format again, but the thing that really interested me about this movie, which is really a lonely kind of lonely sad movie, and it's sad and lonely in a much different sense than Mountains Made Apart. I feel like Mountains Made Apart kind of ends on this, it's kind of lonely and sad, but this little kind of melancholic happy ending as she's dancing to Pet Shop Boys. And this one doesn't really have that release necessarily. It's interesting in the first story when you're watching her kind of interact as the girlfriend of this mobster. Zhao Tao has this. She's such a fantastic actress. It's interesting to watch her kind of learn and try to flex the same amount of power that he has. I wrote down in my notes while I was watching it that you have this scene where her boyfriend, played by Lao Fan, pulls out a cigarette, and then you see 5 lighters come out of nowhere because all of the different mobsters are trying to light his cigarette for him since he's the boss. You have another scene where somebody buys them cigars, and he says, "I need a cigar cutter," and 6 mobsters throw their knives in the middle of the table for him to cut his cigar. And then kind of a little while after that, she's in the car and she's like, "Oh, I want to go to this dumpling shop." And he's like, "Oh, well, it's kind of far away." And she's like, "Well, I want to go." And so he's like, "All right." So he tells them to turn the car around. And then she's like, "You know what? Never mind." Kind of in this in this moment to kind of show that she has that kind of the same amount of power to kind of flex with him and has this control over these people. Of course, when right after that scene happens, it's the scene where she has to break up the fight and kind of ends that whole run. And what's so tragic about the transition from the first story to the second story is not necessarily the loss of this relationship and the loss of this love, but also I think for her character, it's about she is realizing how kind of temperamental that power is that she had. She kind of was living vicariously through her boyfriend and had this power over people because of the kind of mobster clout that he had in the town. And she realizes really quickly that now that she's headed to prison and somewhat cut off from this from that lifeline that she had, she's realizing that one, she really has no identity for herself outside of him, and also that she kind of lacks that power structure that she was living in. So then the second story is interesting just as she again has to kind of come to terms with the fact that he has moved on from her, even though she invested so much in that relationship. And then the third story really kind of brings that all to a head because he has clearly lost whatever power he was holding or over this period of time, and is now relegated to this wheelchair and is kind of on his own. And she's the only person who pretty much picks up the call in order to take care of him. And so while she doesn't necessarily have the power and the kind of will that he had in the first story, she still has this connection to all of these people in this community, which at the end of the day, as it shows in this third story, that's what came from any of this, that they do have this kind of network of people that are looking out for them. And so I don't know. Like I said, it was less. I feel like it had less of the power, or less of the. I had less of a takeaway that I did from Mountains Made Apart. This one was much more interesting in the kind of rather than dealing more strictly with the relationship between the characters, and more just how kind of fleeting it can be when you realize like what your worth is to this other person. So I really enjoyed it. Michael, I know you'd seen it earlier this year. I mean, did you have anything else to add?
I mean, you covered a lot of what I would say. I think it's good. This is the third of this director's movies that I've seen. It's probably the one that stuck with me the least. But I thought it was good nonetheless. And yeah, I mean, that ending is pretty crushingly sad in a way that, like, for instance, Mountains May Depart is not, like you said. One of the things that I kind of liked about both this movie and then the Mountains May Depart is that there's a sort of like there are like these unexpected moments of like where these like unrealistic elements will like encroach on the movie. So like in Mountains May Depart, there's like the third sequence takes place in the future and is like lightly sci-fi. And then in this movie, there's like a whole sequence where she meets a UFO enthusiast and then like actually encounters a UFO, and I think it's in the second sequence, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and
it's at the. I think it ends the second sequence into the third.
Right. Yeah, and I really like that sort of touch. Like, I don't have any like grand thesis on it, but I enjoy the way that it kind of like almost disorients the movie. And I mean, these are already movies that are a little bit disorienting because of the way that they're like split into thirds, and you'll just have these like time jumps when you're not expecting them. But I also like that in addition to that there are these moments of like almost like in this movie there's like a sort of transcendent power in like the fact that this like appears. Because you meet the UFO enthusiast and it's kind of like, oh, okay, this is just kind of like this weird quirky fellow, and then when the thing that he's searching for actually shows up, and it's sort of like solemn is the wrong word, but like it gives like a gravity to that character that you weren't expecting, and then like the woman's experience with it feels like sort of distinct as well, especially because like you said, that's like I guess right before another time jump into the third piece, and and it comes right after she's like had to come to grips with the fact that her boyfriend has kind of left her, has moved on, has just pretty much forgotten her, even though she performed this act in order to save him. And she has like this really awkward interaction with him in this hotel room where it's kind of funny, but it's also really tragic, where he like holds her left hand and he's like, "This hand saved my life," and then she just kind of looks down at it and then like looks at him and goes, "I'm not left-handed," like, and pulls it away. And the scene with then you go into that scene with the UFO enthusiast, and the UFO enthusiast kind of has this. You can see that she's unsure of like she wants to latch on to something again because she's so adrift and it's scaring her. And so even though it's like this absurd scene where the UFO enthusiast is talking about aliens coming to Earth and how he's studying them and how he's going to develop like this like travel whatever for like travel business for the city that he's going to, and so she kind of like latches onto that and follows him, and then he just shows like this complete he almost has like this neutered quality to him. And so I think it like she recognizes that she doesn't want to latch herself onto somebody else. And so it's kind of like this strange but also poetic moment when like she sees the UFO, and then it transitions into the third one because it's like this signifier that she's separating herself from having to rely completely on other people, as this separate force enters the world space with the UFO. Right. Yeah. I mean, it's still a good movie. I don't know if I sounded too down on it. I like the movie. It just hasn't stuck with me super strongly, aside from like maybe a few moments, like particularly the ending, and then.
Yeah. Also, it has a really amazing sequence where it's in the first storyline where her and her boyfriend are with a number of members from his gang, and they're at this nightclub and they're dancing to YMCA.
I forgot about that. That is a good part.
So, yeah. So first they have them dancing the YMCA, and then his gun falls out, and they have this whole exchange where he's like having to kind of quietly put that away because that could completely end what he's been building up. And so then they have like this whole back and forth, and then they play YMCA again, and it's like all the people and all these mobsters and all these people of this town who are like trying to take for I guess lack of a better phrase, like the economic train up with where this town is supposed to be going. And so it's all of them at the nightclub dancing, and then he just like has this really nice cut where it cuts to all of these miners it's like a mining town that they are living near, and so you have all of these miners who are losing their jobs and trying to find work because the mine is being I forgot what something about like it's just being closed down because they're making room for other businesses or some for whatever reason the mine is kind of shutting down and they're losing their jobs. And so it has this amazing cut during YMCA, which is a song very much directed to like the working class people, to these working class citizens in this town who are kind of dancing around, just trying to kill time and have some freedom within the night as they're looking for work. And it's just like this really profound use of editing and music.
Yeah, that was a good part too. I'd forgotten about it.
So Ash's Purest White, you can catch it on Canopy if you have that. I think it's worth checking out. And if you have not seen Mountains Made Apart, it's also on Canopy, and I would highly recommend seeing that. It's really, really good. His other movie, the only other one I've seen of his is A Touch of Sin, which that's an interesting one as well. But anyway, Michael, I'm going to toss it over to you. You caught a favorite of Nathan's. I think he'll be excited to hear that we're talking about this.
Yeah, so I watched Gremlins 2, the new batch, which is, of course, the sequel to the 1980s movie Gremlins. And this one kind of picks up, I guess it's however many years after the original as this release is, in the movie timeline. When I don't remember the character names, but the little boy from Gremlins has grown up and he's kind of like living in New York City now. And in New York City, you have this kind of like evil landlord baron who's like buying up all these places so he can build like office parks and that sort of thing. And so the like Curiosity Shop he's trying to buy up the Curiosity Shop that like had the Gremlins in the first movie, and that's kind of how the movie begins. And basically it's not really important. The plot is like really like very secondary in this movie to what the main thing is, which is, of course, like the first movie, eventually the Gremlins get subjected to water and or sunlight and or being fed after midnight. And of course all hell breaks loose as they mutate into their new forms. But this movie takes it to a much more extreme degree than the first one. So you had the first one where you had the Gremlins kind of running amok in this kind of quintessential like Americana small town, and they're just basically ripping up all this like Christmas kitsch, So it's the first movie is kind of like this like piss take on like Christmas nostalgia, and you get that like great scene where the girl in that movie is like remembering how her dad had dressed as Santa Claus but had gotten stuck in the chimney and died there. And I feel like that's kind of the ethos of the first movie is, a dead Santa Claus in the chimney, and it's kind of like black comedy. Whereas this movie is not at Christmas time at all, I don't believe. And what ends up happening is the Gremlins run amok inside the office building run by this evil like landlord guy. And in the office building is a big experimental wing where they do like corporate experiments to try to like create new products or whatever. And part of the experiments is like the Gremlins getting all this new stuff, like these new chemicals thrown in them, and so they mutate a lot. And so like even more so than in the first one, you have the Gremlins doing these kind of like pop culture pastiches. but it's just unhinged to the max. Like it's so chaotic. The movie opens with like the kind of Warner Brothers logo, but it's like the cartoon Looney Tunes thing where you have like the Looney Tunes theme, and then Bugs Bunny jumps up, and like this is all before the movie begins, and then Daffy Duck shows up, and Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck start fighting over the who gets to give the intro to the movie, and eventually they just like rip the whole thing up, and I feel like that's kind of like what the movie is doing in general, which is to set up this kind of environment for these gremlins to basically be like live action cartoons to completely just run rampant over like the pop culture that is of the like 20th century. So you get like a gremlin who's like Rambo, and you get a gremlin who like falls into a vat of like stuff that makes him smart, and so you get him like on a talk show, and he's like the only articulate like gremlin who can speak English and stuff, and so you get a gremlin like musical sequence where they're singing New York, New York, and just like tearing apart this this office building. It's just madcap and delightful. Like it's there's just so many like little fun details and surprises in this, and like I don't know, I really like the satire of the first one, and I feel like the satire of this one is not quite as like sharp and pointed. I mean, there's an element of like the idea of running rampant over like this kind of like Donald Trump style real estate baron in the same way that they run amok over like, kind of like kitschy Christmas stuff in the first one. That's kind of fun. But in general, this is just like about like all this like insane like puppetry, like pop culture, like postmodern mashup stuff that I just think is like really, really fun and demented and just like, really, like I said, like kind of unhinged and unpredictable. There's also like a kind of running theme throughout the movie of like the kind of like old Hollywood fading out. This kind of, like for instance, there's a guy who runs like a late night like horror movie thing, where he's like I don't know, kind of like a Vincent Price kind of character, like introducing horror movies, and so like he starts like he's being kind of phased out. I think like he's being put later at night, but he's kind of empowered by the gremlin chaos, and so he's like running this like news coverage of like the gremlins overrunning the skyscraper in a way that's kind of fun because it's like weirdly poignant because these gremlins are like embodying a lot of the pop culture that like his show is celebrating, while at the same time he's kind of like terrified by them. I just thought it was really fun, and I just had a great time, and it's like I said, it's like demented and weird and sadistic and like super dark comedy like the first one, but just with the madcap level just cranked up as high as it can be. And you get some really fun like eventually like the fourth wall gets broken and stuff like that, where the movie itself literally gets like torn to shreds by the chaos of the gremlins, and I just had a great time with it. If you like the first Gremlins, I'm sure you'll like this one. If you didn't like the first Gremlins, you may like this one just because it's like much stranger and more off the rails. But you might not also like this one either because it's still a bunch of gremlins running around.
Yeah, we watched the first Gremlins for a series a couple years back, and I thought it was fine. I wasn't like super into it, but this one I've heard like just like the whole anti-capitalism bent to it is really kind of fun and crazy and much more like poignant than a lot of other like movies that try to make like this anti-capitalist statement, or at least I know that's how Nathan has talked about it. Just he said that he kind of digs what this movie is and what Joe Dante is kind of doing with that subject rather than what a lot of others have tried to do.
It's definitely like it's anti a certain type of capitalism, I guess. Like for instance, it loves the movies, it loves old Hollywood, and so in a sense like it sort of celebrates like that sort of system where like. But what it really hates is this sort of like yuppie like 1980s and 90s like New York culture of like taking New York City and turning it into this sterile place full of like glass and skyscrapers and just like places that are meant to like harvest profit from like literally everything they can. The movie ends with the the like real estate villain, finding out about the small town that the first movie takes place in, and deciding that his next project is going to be mass producing this small town to like market everywhere, and he's going to make it into like little trinkets or something like that. So it really hates this whole like kind of vulture element to like, I guess, that kind of like late 20th century capitalism of where you take everything and just make it what can maximize shareholder value and stuff like that. But like I said, it does kind of love some of this other stuff. It has like a kind of Rambo parody where like he's like saving the day and stuff like that. So I would say that there's maybe a little bit of if it's not completely anti-capitalist, there's maybe a little bit of a mixed message there as far as like what it does. But it's definitely a celebration of a certain kind of anarchy that's against like the suits and the landlords and those kind of elements of capitalism.
Interesting. Well, I'm definitely going to try to check it out at some point. I know. Isn't it? Yeah, it seems like a lot of fun. Cool. Yeah, we're going to take a short break. We'll be talking about 2010 movies after this.
Hey, Cinematary listeners, Andrew here. During this break in the show, I'd like to mention that Cinematary does want your money. You can give us your money at patreon.com/cinematary, where you can chip in a small fee of about $5 a month, the price of a fancy coffee, in exchange for shout outs in every episode, the opportunity to choose movies we cover on the show, and bonus episodes every month in which we talk about more movies as well as other miscellaneous stuff. In the past, we've just been humbly asking for you to share the show and engage with us, and we would still love for you to do those things. You can tweet us at Cinematary, send us an email, zach@cinematary.com, leave us a review on iTunes, all that stuff. But Cinematary has grown a ton in the past few years due to the hard work of a bunch of writers, myself included, who haven't been paid for their labor, which is sadly a pretty normal thing. We record things and write things for free, you listen to and read them for free, and the only people getting paid are like Apple and Google, which is depressing. So, if you appreciate what we do, if you feel like there's some sort of value being exchanged here and you'd like more of it, help us normalize paying people by going to patreon.com/cinematary and chipping in $5 a month. We would truly appreciate it. Thanks for listening. Now let's get back to the show.
And we are back with part 2 of episode 271 of Cinematary, and in this part we will be starting our Best of the Decade series with the year 2010. So this is going to be a little bit of a free-flowing affair. We're still kind of figuring out exactly how we want to go about this, but the first thing we wanted to do was kind of bring our picks for what, looking back 9 years later, what we think is the... I don't know, this is kind of a weird definition. Not necessarily the best movie of that year, but what movie we kind of see as the most defining of 2010 that it could be your personal favorite. It could be just like what you find best exemplifies this period of time, what you think has the most influence on movies, afterwards. I think it kind of just embodies all of that, as Andrew has described. I said it in this. Let me just say, I said this kind of in a passive aggressive, throwaway sense of that. We should only look at movies 5 years later and then reassess what the best movie of that year was. Which I agree with, but it was also kind of just being a passive aggressive line. And so I think it's interesting looking at 2010. We were talking about like looking at just the. If you look at like the blockbuster landscape, this was the year that Inception came out, which I know that The Dark Knight, I feel like, is one that still kind of has a lot of resonance in terms of like Christopher Nolan's movies, but I think Inception also has a lot of resonance as like a kind of cultural moment to an extent. I mean, you also have what was initially the finale to Toy Story, that has since changed this year, and a lot of other movies. But I kind of wanted to start the discussion with these movie picks that we made, and for the most part, I think we had from the people who are not on the episode who sent in stuff, as well as a few of the people on this episode right now, kind of went with the consensus of The Social Network, which was the David Fincher film, which was kind of chronicling the early days of Facebook, from Mark Zuckerberg creating Face Mash in 2003, and then kind of turning that into what would now become Facebook, and ending, on the moment where Facebook really started to kind of take off to the point to where it is now. And I think there's a lot that we can discuss in terms of Facebook's rise in culture, but I'm curious, kind of about let's start first with just kind of about this movie, because I think just as a movie, it has a lot of cultural resonance, and so. Yeah, Miranda, I want to start with you because you actually just caught up with this recently, and so I'm curious what you made of The Social Network 9 years later, especially in a time we're recording this where Facebook is coming under a lot of scrutiny from the government. What you made of this story that's told.
Right. So yeah, this, like you said, this is my first time seeing it, and I recall trying to watch this movie a few years ago, and I just couldn't get through the 15 minutes because I thought he was so horrible. But what is the length of this movie? It's kind of a longer movie, but I was 2 hours. Yeah, I really enjoyed it, but I was also like just kind of wincing the whole time, like, oh my God, I know it's going to happen. But yeah,
You mentioned the first 15 minutes because I had not watched this. I rewatched it for the episode. I had not watched this since 2014. And I was thinking about like I saw it a number of times, like around the time that it came out, and then I guess the last time I'd watched it was 2014. And the first 15 minutes, which for those who as a reference, it's the scene between Mark Zuckerberg, who's played by Jesse Eisenberg, and a girl who he's on a date with, played by Rooney Mara, and it's like this back and forth between them, and then that break because she pretty much is just like, fuck you, and leaves. He heads back, begins blogging and programming, and creates this website, which Face Mash, which rates, which gives you a picture of two girls, and you click on which one, you just pick one of them, and this was pulled from the various Facebooks on Harvard's campus. But yeah, that first scene between Jesse Eisenberg and Rooney Mara, I wrote down a couple lines that I thought just kind of honestly just encapsulated just who Mark Zuckerberg is. She has this line where she's like, "You're obsessed with final clubs," and then he like retorts with, "There's a difference between being obsessed and being motivated," which to me kind of speaks to just I guess the Silicon Valley billionaire mindset, like of obsession versus motivation, and where that leads. I guess we're breaking into the more current pop culture link to The Social Network with this, but I was just thinking about that in terms of his testimonies in front of the House recently, where I think it seems like the way please correct me or jump in with your thoughts, but it seems to me like in his mind, he feels like he's creating this thing that can help a lot of people, you know, he sees it as kind of like this motivation, but as on the outside, it's more of just this obsession, and he's creating this machine that he's become so blinded by that he doesn't recognize all the damage that he's kind of making in its wake. Does that make any sense?
Right. Yes, I absolutely agree. Yes.
And so I was just thinking of that, like in that line, like you're obsessed with Final Clubs. Like, it kind of just depressed me in that moment because I'm like, yeah, like we're stuck in this situation with Facebook, etc. Because this dude couldn't get in a Final Club and was like vengeful against all of these other people for not letting him in this. Like, why could it's like the Hitler? Like, we could have just let Hitler be an artist. Like, just why couldn't you have just put Mark Zuckerberg in a damn Final Club?
God, we wouldn't be here right
You heard
now.
it here first. Mark Zuckerberg is Hitler.
Yeah, I'm sorry. But yeah, no, I think that first 15 minutes is pretty telling. And it's weird because I was thinking back also because in 2010 watching this, I don't know if I necessarily was like, I think there was a degree of like, oh, this is pretty, like, not necessarily in the fight that he has with Rooney Mara, but like the aftermath of that, just like the pulsating score by Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross, which is the first time we kind of hear them doing that, to the kind of different cuts that David Fincher is doing between Zuckerberg programming and blogging, and you have like this look at the more traditional bro party scene of like these college girls being bussed into this party and going to like a frat house and just kind of taking part in all of that debauchery, compared to Zuckerberg and his friends in this in like their apartment drinking beer, and he's programming and creating this. It's like it's two sexist systems that are like working in parallel but are telling of like the past to the future. And so I think in 2010, like I was like that whole sequence, I was like, yeah, this is awesome. Just from the score, from just like the way he's like cutting between these scenes, from just the performance by Jesse Eisenberg, I was really into it. And watching it now, I was so sad.
Yeah, I don't think in 2010, like, I mean, as a male, I was pretty oblivious, and I wasn't super online in 2010. I was in college, which is my first basic exposure to the internet for the most part. My family had like dial-up at home, and it just didn't work out too well. But I feel like, at least to me, and I think to a lot of like the public at large, like the misogynist undercurrent of like the structure of the internet, or like this whole like phenomenon of like male anger mobilized on the internet, wasn't yet like a talking point. Like, it surely happened, and obviously in the movie it shows it happening, you know, much prior to 2010. But like, you know, we were like pre-Gamergate, pre like the alt-right, and like things like that like now are kind of like really like nationally recognized, like moments of like you know, especially like white male like kind of toxicity that like spills out from online into the public space. And I think this movie, one of the things I didn't recognize, because I was kind of like, I don't know if I thought like the face smash was great, but like I was really kind of caught up in like just the because I did some coding and stuff like that, and I thought it was like cool to see like the pieces come together of like these people who are just like hammering out like code to be kind of like, they're kind of assholes about it, but also it's kind of impressive that they can like do this in a night and like, you know, whatever.
Yeah, it's like they're assholes, but they're like, what they're doing is impressive. You know, it's kind of like that old like, yeah, he's a jerk, but what he's doing, like, you should be impressed by the work kind of thing.
Right. And I guess what I'm saying is like, the movie sort of at the time, to me, I think probably played into some like, you know, male privilege that I had, maybe like a ignorance of like, you know, the female experience online, and maybe I didn't engage with that on a critical level, but B, I think in retrospect, you know, since like that has come to like I guess like a tipping point toward like, you know, kind of a national emergency of sorts, where mobilized online male like misogyny, you know, has like, you know, dire national consequences. It kind of becomes obvious to me in like retrospect just how awful this was. Whereas, I don't know, I guess women watching it probably knew it all along, and I am the fool.
Yeah, no, I'm there with you. I mean, I was completely oblivious to the entire, to that entire mindset throughout. I mean, the scene where he is, it seems like so almost archaic because this is in the world of the movie is happening in 2003, but he's like blogging. He's pretty much like he's like having a Twitter storm of like, this is what I'm feeling in this moment. So he's just blogging as he's creating this website and pulling all of these pictures of these girls and creating this site. And while he's blogging, he's just completely tearing down in just these incredibly misogynistic manners, Rooney Mara's character, to the point that because he's like what he's doing is becoming recognized across campus. Like you have that sequence where her roommate's like, he's blogging about you. And yeah, I was saying, off mic before we started, that you could probably just watch the first 15 minutes of this movie and then be like, all right, I like that gives you an understanding of just the world of the internet, and that it just completely encapsulates what it means to be online, because it's just like this pretty innocent conversation that turns into an argument because Zuckerberg just kind of gets so defensive about what he perceives that she's insinuating about him and his desire to be in this final club, or the insecurity that he has because he thinks that she's not gonna like be with him because he doesn't row crew and is not this kind of jockey character. And that's why, and I remember this scene when I originally watched it, but I was just like really taken aback with David Fincher's directing at when you have the much more traditional like frat party hanging out with you have all these girls there, they're like making out with each other, they're like they're playing strip poker, they're taking off their clothes, they're dancing, they're drinking, and it's like this much more traditional vision of like the bro culture. And then you're kind of countering, or you're paralleling that and going back and forth with what Zuckerberg and his friends are doing. And I think in 2010, it seemed like those were the underdogs. So what they're doing, you might say it's wrong, but it's like the underdog. Like it's like these guys won't ever get to that other party. So like they have to do this. This is just what they do. Like you kind of like relate to that if you don't necessarily see yourself as like the person who would be at the other party. But now in 2019, you're just kind of like, no, both of these are terrible. Like let's eradicate both of these. And that was just something that struck me on the rewatch recently.
Well, and that's such a part of the internet narrative. That's such an internet narrative now too, that you see in like, I guess with like incels and things like that, is this idea of like this hierarchy of masculinity where, the jocks or the, I don't know, whatever, chads or whatever the hell, they're the ones that get the chicks, and we, poor oppressed other men don't get the chicks. And so this is why we're lashing out in the way.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so like that, I mean, that's kind of been a narrative for a long time, but in the internet era, it mobilized and kind of morphed into what it is now, where it's like a kind of like whole identity that you embody. And like you're saying, like I think the movie does a great job of like just kind of really quickly just puncturing that narrative and showing it just for naked misogyny, basically.
Well, and there's I was listening to the New York Times podcast, Still Processing, recently, and they were talking about David Fincher's Fight Club in comparison to movies like Joker that have come out today, and how they're like how these movies, and it's like how Fight Club was trying to look at masculinity compared to these more modern ones. And I was thinking of that looking at The Social Network, which I feel like is Fincher much more streamlined in his view of like, I would be curious, I guess I should have done more research, but I'd be curious to see how conscious or aware he or Aaron Sorkin or the people like who kind of created the project were of that. Like, was that something that they were trying to accomplish? Because in like the way that Fight Club is is speaking to masculinity. I feel like the Social Network is doing a similar thing, but it's much more pronounced with its condemnation of Zuckerberg. But at the same time, it also, I mean, it kind of pulls its punch, because you have the very end of the movie where he like has the scene with the character, the like paralegal played by Rashida Jones, where she's kind of talking about all the events that they've kind of covered over the movie, and he says something along the lines of like, I'm not I can't remember if he says I'm not an asshole or I don't want to be an asshole or something of that nature, and she's like, no, you're not an asshole, and then I verbally to the TV said, yes, he is. And then you have like this kind of what's supposed to be like a bittersweet him sending the friend request to the Rooney Mara character all these years later and like refreshing. And I remember the conversation around it at that time was like, oh, this is what it's like to be on Facebook. Like you send that friend request to that person who you haven't talked to in a long time, or you have a crush on, or something along that lines, and you sit there and just refresh, waiting for it to waiting for them to accept, and like that anxiety of that whole was kind of like this melancholic, bittersweet moment to end the movie. And I don't know, it absolutely did not play that way for me. And when I rewatched it this week, it like I said, it just kind of felt like this pulling of the punch when he needed to get hit in the face. Like that's just like he needed to get knocked down, and Fincher kind of pulled his punch and kind of let him off the hook a little bit. And I don't know. I can't decide if I should put that as a strike against the movie, because I think it's also saying so many interesting things about the internet and the internet culture and masculinity. But at the same time, I don't know if this is my my very recent 2019 brain being like, yeah, no, like you like hit Zuckerberg in the face with whatever you got. Like, I mean, that's fine.
I don't know that in 2010 anyone was expecting Facebook to be an organization of international political importance. So
that's very true.
I feel like maybe typical of the internet in general. We dudes have been talking a lot. Miranda, do you have more thoughts about this movie?
I'm sorry.
No, it's not your
fault. Sorry, no. I'm usually a listener. Well, and I that's interesting that you say that, Zach. I found that last scene, and throughout the movie, I mean, I feel like, and I don't know if this comes off as defending Mark Zuckerberg, because I don't at all. But it's only and as this isn't new, it's this thing that he created, Facebook. It's only not extending, but like further extending those relationship problems or any conflicts that are already present in a in a relationship with somebody. So like that, if let's say had Facebook not been there and Mark Zuckerberg had done something productive and not just used his anger over this. His girlfriend that had just broken up with him because he's an asshole, done something productive. Now here's something that you can easily find your ex that said something to you that you didn't agree with, and they're right there. Or like the part with Andrew Garfield's character, his girlfriend comes over and she's like, why am I not why doesn't your Facebook say in a relationship? It's just, I feel like it's only further creating these problems. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, it's the thing that was interesting, because it kind of dates the movie as well. Like at the time when it came out, it felt like this very relevant thing that you could kind of relate to, the kind of Facebook quirks and issues of like relationship statuses and stuff. But like but now today, Facebook has evolved so much, and like Michael and we've alluded to, has become such a player on the global political scene that like the small things of like, oh, your relationship status is single, we're in a relationship, like what are you saying, or just some of those things just seem so minuscule in the scheme of things. And again, I don't think that's like a hit on the movie. It's true to the era that it's speaking to, but it also just kind of again shows the rapid growth and the rapid growth of what Facebook has become today.
Right. No, absolutely. Yes. No, I agree. There's something else I want to say, but I can't remember. Sorry.
What did you all make of kind of looking back at Justin Timberlake, the Sean Parker character? Because he seems very true to, like, again, this era of Silicon Valley entrepreneur. But I don't know. I'd be curious to get your opinions on how he plays today.
I mean, that's kind of interesting if we look at like the scope of the decade too, because we see kind of Justin Timberlake as an entertainer moving away from solely being a musician and kind of like investing in these kind of prestige roles, because he was in like Inside Llewyn Davis and like he did a couple other roles as well. I think he works really well in this movie, although if we take this movie as like trying to depict Mark Zuckerberg as a character, like a real person, I do feel like this is maybe another element where it like pulls its punches, because like Sean Parker in the movie kind of embodies the most toxic elements of like internet startup culture, and Mark Zuckerberg is kind of just following him, and so it almost makes Mark Zuckerberg seem like in some ways just like he's bad, like what he does is bad, but it's because of Sean Parker's bad influence. It's not like that Mark Zuckerberg's vision was corrupted to begin with, and but that said, like, I think this movie works better, less as like a chronicle of like real life, like what happened with Facebook, and more of just kind of like what you've been talking about, Zach, is like, this is sort of an explication of like what the internet is. And I think for sure, like this idea of like like someone like Sean Parker, like a disruptor, like just coming in and like that whole ethos of disruption and like monetary gain, like entwined and like taking precedence over everything is like totally like the story of like the internet, like Web 2.0 and like all that stuff. And so I think like as a thematic piece of that sort of project, I really like the Sean Parker character.
Yeah, it's there's a lot about the movie that I still think because I still had it as like what would be my pick for 2010 as like the best movie of that year, just because I think even in the years following, the internet we're doing this on the internet right now, like what we're doing. Podcasts would not be a thing really without the internet. Like the internet has become so ingrained into everything, and the thing about the social network that separates it from a lot of other movies dealing with the internet is that I still think that it has really interesting ideas. It says a lot of interesting ideas, and it understands a lot of concepts of the internet that a lot of other films of that ilk don't have. Even to the extent of like Aaron Sorkin kind of trying to replicate it with the Steve Jobs movie. But I think that
another movie that pulls its punches. By the way.
It super pulls its punches. That one pulls its punches even more. But like it says it kind of understands the nature of the internet in a much more profound way than just the typical person going, well, the internet is, it's not somebody who's like 55 and up trying to talk about the internet who lived with such a long period of time without the internet that their kind of assessment of what the internet is just boring and benign, for whatever reason,
which is kind of amazing considering like that Aaron Sorkin wrote this, and his track record this past decade. I mean, he's got The Newsroom, which I think was like, I didn't watch that much of it, but its reputation is kind of like the epitome of like, how do you do, fellow kids, kind of political commentary, right? Because doesn't it open on that whole scene about like kids, the world, the generation today is like this, and it's kind of like this grumpy, I don't know. I feel like Aaron Sorkin, like as a writer, definitely like the seams began to show a lot this decade as far as like his disconnect from like what was actually at the vanguard of what was happening. And The Social Network doesn't feel like that at all.
No, you're 100% right. And just kind of hearing like what he was trying to do with like the updated To Kill a Mockingbird, where he was like just you know, I don't none of us live in New York, so we weren't able to see it, but like the kind of rundowns of what he kind of did to update To Kill a Mockingbird to kind of speak to 2019. It just seems again like that kind of benign, boring boomer assessment of pop culture that just has no legs. So I don't know. Maybe I don't know if it's him. I don't know if it's just maybe it's kind of David Fincher, because I'm looking at like what David Fincher has done, really, like from Zodiac to this to even Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, and with his small involvement with House of Cards and Gone Girl. Like I think maybe it's more his stamp on this movie that makes the difference. But let's kind of shift gears a little bit, because The Social Network was one of a number of films. So looking at like the Academy Awards, which I feel like is generally what the gauge is for most people to say what's the best movie of the year, which is sad. People, please don't do that. If you're listening to this podcast and you do that, please don't do that. But the winner for this year is The King's Speech, which it beat The Social Network as well as movies like 127 Hours. Be honest, I feel like that doesn't really have any cultural relevance today outside of people thinking of like the weird stuff James Franco has to do as the character in that movie. You have Black Swan, which I think, again, this in my opinion kind of had a moment for a little, for a while, but I don't know if it still kind of has any relevance today. You have The Fighter, which just kind of just reignited David O. Russell, which is kind of, it's still it's a fine movie. Inception, which I think we can talk about as still being pretty relevant. The Kids are All Right, which I think has zero cultural relevancy, even though it desperately wanted to in that moment. Toy Story 3, True Grit, which I think is I like True Grit, but we also probably would have to have a long discussion of just the Coens from this period of time on, and then Winter's Bone, which I think its relevance really was just giving us Jennifer Lawrence as like a kind of a star of this period of time. Going through that Best Picture rundown as well as like The King's Speech, I mean, what do you all think of those different titles and their kind of cultural relevancy today?
I want to make an argument for like the relevancy of a couple of the movies that you kind of dismissed, not because of like the movies themselves, but like how they're positioned within people's careers. So like, for instance, The Fighter, I mean, if I'm remembering right, that's like David O. Russell's return from his sort of like weird exile, right? And then it's followed up by like American Hustle, and like he had his whole kind of moment this decade as like a prestige director again, before I think kind of spinning out again, right? And so like that movie, The Fighter, is kind of important because it like rockets David O. Russell, who then like of course like contributes to like the rising star of oh my gosh,
Jennifer Lawrence.
Sorry, Winter's Bone. Jennifer Lawrence. Yeah. And same with like Black Swan, for example. So like you have Darren Aronofsky, who has like known for these like really intense, like, psychological like movies with this really intense style and stuff like that. And Black Swan's kind of like the last hurrah of that in a way, because after this he makes, I don't remember if The Wrestler's after that or not, but then he goes on his like weird little like biblical midrash thing with like Noah and Mother, and I feel like that he gets the leverage to do that because of things like Black Swan and like his kind of gradual like mainstream support that like gets.
Well, yeah, because Black Swan and the Wrestler were kind of like, I mean, they were Oscar, kind of prestige movies with like the Mickey Rourke narrative with The Wrestler, and then Natalie Portman for Black Swan. At least that kind of gave him like the awards cachet, I guess. So I agree.
Right. Yeah. So I feel like some of the movies on here are like hinges for like where some of their creators would go in the next decade in kind of interesting and important ways. But Anyway, that's sort of my thought.
What do you make of True Grit? Because like again, I like True Grit, but like is in terms of Coen Brothers movies from the period of time that we're talking about, like does that have the most? Is that the one that you most think of?
I mean, I probably think of Inside Llewyn Davis the most, but it is a kind of interesting thing because it's what was the movie they made right before that? Was it Burn After Reading? Maybe. But it was, I mean...
Serious Man.
Serious Man. But I the big one before that, was several years before that with No Country for Old Men, which they won the Academy Award for Best Picture of. And I feel like after that happened, like they kind of entered the kind of weird stage that like prestige directors sometimes get into where everyone recognizes them as like important directors, but no one is as excited about their movies as they ever were, like as they were at one point. So like maybe like Martin Scorsese in the 80s doing like kind of stuff that like, he has the kind of like weird, like off the wall, like, experiments in the 80s. And I feel like the Coens in the 2010s, like they've always had their weird off the wall experiments, but they kind of became all that in the 2010s, which I really dug. But I don't think they ever like got as popular as they were with like No Country for Old Men, and True Grit is maybe a step in that, in the sense that I think a lot of people dismiss it as, it's kind of like the cuddly Coen brother movie. It's the remake, and it has it's like PG-13 and all that sort of stuff, and it's like a movie that people like but no one is really super enthusiastic about. And I don't know, I really like what the Coens have done in the past 9 years, but I don't know, I'm rambling about it because it's a movie I like, but I don't know how it fits in.
Yeah. Miranda, what about you? Out of these best picture picks, I mean, do you feel like there's kind of some ones that still kind of stand the test of time past 2010?
Well, like I said, I really didn't. So in 2010, I was watching a lot of classic Hollywood movies, so I didn't pay attention to much of what was going on.
So you were better than us.
No, I feel so clueless. I'm like, David O. Russell had films before The Fighter. That's where I'm at right now. And then I saw 127 Hours later in college, and it's fine. I mean, I forgot all about it until today.
Well, what about, I mean, maybe this would be a good point to kind of talk a little bit about The King's Speech, which is a movie I don't dislike, but it's a relatively inoffensive movie. It kind of does what it does, and doesn't. I don't know if it's the best picture of that year. I mean, what do you make of The King's Speech?
Right. No, it was. I think that was one I saw a few years later with my mom, and it's like you said, it's inoffensive. It's fine. Like I have nothing bad to say about it. But it's not something that I think is relevant at all now.
Even like the performance, I know that Colin Firth's performance was kind of the headliner, and it's fine.
It's just fine.
Yeah.
It's just fine.
Everything about it's fine.
We now have oh man, I forgot that I'm looking at the Wikipedia page for this Academy Awards. Tom Hooper won Best Director for King's Speech.
Yeah, that's bad. That was bad.
Get over Black Swan, The Fighter, Social Network, True Grit. Like, I've not seen The Fighter, but any of those other three movies, I don't remember any directorial decisions in The King's Speech. But I like The King's Speech too. I remember seeing it with my parents as well, Miranda. But it was in the theater. I was working in a.
I feel like there's a trend.
Yeah, I mean,
yes.
I was working in the movie theater, like in a movie theater at the time, so I had seen, I think, all of these movies by the time the Academy Awards came around, and so I definitely remember, like, there would be movies my parents would ask me to get them into for free, and The King's Speech was one of them, and, I mean, it's definitely that kind of movie with, like, a, older clientele, and, I mean, it really fits the model of, like, the last few decades of like what we would consider like Oscar bait, like important social moment distilled down into a kind of like serious but not like overwhelmingly bleak, character study, and that buoyed by like some kind of charismatic performances by like famous actors. I feel like it really works on that. And as that kind of movie, I think it's better than a lot of movies of that ilk. Like it's very funny and like charming and stuff like that. But one thing I was kind of
I rewatched it recently for my Beethoven video essay, and yeah, it's like I'll watch it. Like it's not like a unwatchable movie. It's pretty charming. Like Colin Firth at that point was kind of one of those people knew him from so many things and they liked him, but this was kind of his like, I'm gonna win an award one, and so. And like his performance with Jeffrey Rush, like they're good. Like it's charming. Helena Bonham Carter is it's a very charming and funny movie. And I would 100% rather watch it than a lot of the corresponding kind of similar movies that have come out that have been trying to vie for Oscar Gold. I guess the one thing I kind of want to transition into to kind of wrap up is this can deal with The Social Network. It can deal with some of the best pictures that we've talked about, but just kind of some trends that these movies kind of implemented that have reverberated to the current day. That was one of the big things that I was thinking about with this series, because with The Social Network, I mentioned before that I think that the score of The Social Network is profoundly resonating throughout. And still, I mean, like I said, if you're watching the HBO Watchmen series, they use a Trent Reznor, Atticus Ross score, and they're using one in there, and it kind of has the same, resonating, pulsating beats that The Social Network has. But at the same time, I think in terms of music, and maybe my two trend takeaways are music related, but I think Inception, just the Hans Zimmer, it's kind of a meme, but the Brahm, like that score, like it was very much a barometer for a lot of blockbusters that kind of wanted to be a big blockbuster movie, but also have that, kind of prestige to it. I'm sure in the coming, once we get deeper into the decade, we can talk about the whole trend of slowing down and making like classic Disney songs serious to emphasize importance.
So
but
that's the Social Network trailer is like ground zero for that, right?
That's
it takes
true.
The Radiohead Creep song.
It did. You're right. No, you're right.
Choir.
We can start talking about it. Yeah. No, you're right. It did have that. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think that in terms of like setting the mood for this, like this decade's version of prestige movie, I think that with music for trailers or just the movie itself, I think things like Inception and The Social Network are like, I think that really hit with the directors coming into this decade and starting to make stuff, because I think you see it, you're still seeing it today. But what about you all? Do you have anything that you feel like is kind of carried over?
Well, I'll point this out because I guess a little bit of my brand on Cinematary is connected to Disney, but I do feel like that 2010 is like maybe the moment of ascendancy for Disney as like, at least in the public eye, like the company that it currently is on like on a certain kind of level. They hadn't acquired, I don't think they had acquired Marvel yet or anything like that, but like the two really important developments that I see like in this year is
hadn't they, because Iron Man's 2008,
yeah, but they
right?
hadn't acquired, the MCU had started before Disney acquired it. It was I can't remember when. It was after Iron Man's had come out though that Disney bought Marvel, but I don't remember.
Gotcha. All right.
Or maybe they had bought Marvel, but they weren't dealing with the MCU at the time. I don't remember, but Disney was not involved with the MCU.
Hold on. Just to clarify, Avengers is 2010, right?
I think that's 2012. I think
it's 2012.
2010, I believe, is Thor, and the only reason I know that is because I was at the movie theater at the time, and I remember there being a lightning storm that shut the theater down while I was watching Thor, or maybe that was 2011. I don't know. Anyway, my point is that the two moments that feel significant for Disney in 2010 are, one, Toy Story 3 being released and then nominated for Best Picture, which is, of course, only the second time that an animated feature has had at the time been nominated for a Best Picture Academy Award. The other one being Beauty and the Beast, I guess 20 years prior. And so that kind of sets the stage as that. I guess that's like the crowning moment of like Pixar prestige, because right before that you had like Up and like Wall-E and things like that had really like gotten Pixar a lot of prestige, and of course Disney, you know, as the distributor and whatever. And then Toy Story 3 being nominated for an Academy Award, I think crystallizes like this sort of like Disney style prestige animated film that maybe you see continued in like maybe something like Zootopia later on or something like that, where it's like an animated film with gravitas. And then the other important Disney thing that happens in 2010 was, I don't think it was actually involved with the Oscars, but 2010 is also the year of Tangled, which is kind of when that's kind of when the John Lasseter helmed like Disney. It's not the Renaissance, but I guess it's called like the Neo-Renaissance or Revival or something. That's kind of when it like comes of age. You know, before that you'd had like Princess and the Frog and Bolt, which had done pretty okay compared to like Chicken Little, like which was several years prior to that. But Tangled is really where, like, you know, without Tangled there's no Frozen, you know, for example. And that whole like brand of like what Disney animated movies were in the 2010s, I feel like is established in the year 2010. You know, these kind of lushly detailed, lighthearted, but you know, still kind of like serious, like not serious minded, but like, you know, sincere animated movies that Disney basically made like all through the 2010s, and I guess is now uninterested in as the decade ends, given the what they've been doing and not doing with animation recently. But like between Toy Story 3 and Tangled, I think you have like the pieces of like what Disney is interested in on the animation front in the 2010s.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. Miranda, anything, any trends that you have, or just kind of thoughts on how the trends that we've mentioned, like yay or nay from you, like these are things that are good or bad for movies?
Again, I don't really feel like not qualified, but confident in saying about trends, because like I said, even so 2010 on, I really wasn't watching a lot of these newer movies, and I'm still trying to catch up on them. So I don't know. Sorry.
No, you're fine. But I mean, when it comes to like, especially like Michael's point on Disney, I mean, kind of its relevance as like the cultural force of pop culture. I mean, yeah, go ahead.
No, I think I agree. Especially when you mentioned Tangled. I mean, because then after that we have like Frozen, and I'm thinking about that right now, and how Frozen 2 is coming out, and that really just took off. Frozen. Because yeah, no, I'd agree. I think it was 2009 when Disney acquired Marvel, but I don't know when they actually started. Like, I don't know when they started producing movies then. But I would agree. That's probably the biggest thing from 2010.
Okay, so this is here's some Marvel facts. I'm just doing some Googling right here. So Disney acquired Marvel in, like you said, like 2009, but it wasn't until 2015 that Marvel Studios was integrated into Walt Disney Studios, and then the 2015 MCU was directly run by Disney. So before that, 2015 was when, so like Marvel Studios was, I guess, operating in the same way that I don't know, Disney always had those little arms of acquired companies that they would do ESPN or whatever. But I guess in 2015 was when it became a part of the mainline production of the Walt Disney Company, even though they technically owned it before that.
So I don't know. It's hopefully we sufficiently covered 2010. I'm sure we could probably just spend the entire time talking about The Social Network and the more relevant, current relevant ramifications of it. But I don't know. That seems like a whole other. Yeah, go ahead. Well,
can I just add one thing? I think we discussed this. We did discuss this briefly before recording, but how there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 Best Picture nominations. And I feel like since then, the Academy Awards, like at least for me, the last year, it's just like kind of throw in movies that were popular, but not necessarily the best. Does anyone agree with that? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it kind of turned the the Best Picture category into like a weird. Again, it goes back to the point I made at the beginning of the Academy Awards thing. Like, don't trust this as like the thing that's the best purveyor of.
Yeah, because I'm looking at like the next few years where they still kept like this like a large number of them, and you have movies like Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close was in 2011, like that Academy Awards, which I don't think would have been included on probably a Best Picture list if they hadn't had like 10 movies to fit in there, because that wasn't like super critically acclaimed. It was just kind of popular, and then like the next year. You have like, and not all this bad. Like you have like Beasts of the Southern Wild in 2012, which definitely would never have been like a Best Picture nominee without there being an expanded slate of movies.
No, I definitely agree with that. It kind of, it just kind of warped the entire Best Picture field, for sure. Well, I'll be curious to hear from other people what they make of 2010. If they have if they would like to add to the conversation, or correct us for whatever we said if they felt like we got something wrong. You can do that on Facebook at facebook.com/cinematary, which seems on brand for this episode. On Twitter at handle @cinematary, on Letterboxd at letterboxd.com/cinematary, where we post all the movies that we talked about in this episode. And then also a big thank you to our patrons on Patreon. Hopefully you guys enjoyed our last week episode where we had a video of us talking about Unfriended, which I'm glad we didn't have to do a video thing for this episode because I hated it. But big thank you to our patrons: Cam, Chad Newsom, Christopher Metcalf, Eric Dukowski, Graham Jones, Harry Eskin, Maggie, Marie Barty, Matthew Lingo, Ron Hayes, Tyler Chandler, Whitney Rio Ross, and Miranda Barnwell. Thank you for your $20. Thank you all, and you can find us on patreon.com/cinematary. We got a Film Theory and Chill coming out this week for those who subscribe to that. It's nice, fun Halloween spooky one, so definitely worth it. But yeah, and we got next week. We'll be moving on to 2011, so as we continue our best of the decade series. But yeah, thank you for listening. We'll see you next week.